Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, olúwa mi ò dìde ojó ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀.
Welcome, everyone, to Theoryforge Chronicles. Happy Friday, and thank you for joining us. I am, of course, Phantom X, as always, joined by legendary Neurotoxin and Diggs, and we have a special guest, Snipehunter. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Pretty sure everyone knows who you are, and that's the reason they're here. But we are going to spend tonight actually talking about a topic we started, I think, 2 shows. It kind of came out of nowhere, but basically leveling in mmorpgs. For those who didn't actually see that show, who don't watch us regularly, I don't remember what the conversation was, but essentially we spiraled into this discussion of whether levels, sort of in traditional leveling systems in mmorpgs, whether they're still needed, could things be done differently? And that sort of sparked I think it was an hour-long conversation.
Yeah.
I think we were
whole extra episode.
Yeah. But we thought it was actually pretty fun, and there could be a lot to talk about. And I know Snipe would also like to talk about this. So we want to keep the discussion going. So I guess real quick, my view on this, just so everyone knows, my view was that I feel like leveling systems are sort of outdated, that they are not really needed like they used to be. There are other ways to do things. They don't really mean anything anymore. Diggs, you are sort of the opposite, at least as it comes to mmorpgs, and Neuro, you were kind of in between, I think. But
for me, it's just that you can go either way. It's that a lot of, I'll give an example real quick. The idea that a lot of games have levels and level ups and progression, but we see it at what end? It's so that we have bigger weapons and tougher enemies, and ultimately, if things are balanced, then it all levels out. So why not skip the ramping so that way people can play with their buddies right out the gate instead of them having to climb up this artificial ramp to play at the same content level that you are. Just as one way to kind of think about it, that we can flatten things out if we don't actually have a progression that everything is flat and you're just getting kind of side grades and slight variations that inch you ever closer into the perfect build for how you want to play. But it's not something that's so extreme that you can't, play and participate PvP or PvE with other people and, have everything be unbalanced. It can be done. It's just not something that a lot of folks approach, because it seems like we, as we were talking about in the last episode, we're kind of used to the level up mentality that, D&D was the first RPG that kind of broke away from tactical strat sort of games to be a more small personal experience. And, THAC0 had permeated everything as a result, and it took a while for people to figure out their own armor systems and stop using THAC0, and eventually D&D stopped using THAC0 too, which we all are happy that we never have to use that system ever again. But it permeated things so much that we're just so used to using a level up system. And it really is nice to kind of think about, well, what if we just take that away and we don't actually have to have a ramp? And we just have things like, sure, you can't just walk into anywhere. You'll have to get keys to get through gates. You'll have to get, a warm coat to let you get through the winter areas or whatever, the cold northern, southern areas or whatever. Sure. You'll have to, get your naughty bikini wear or whatever that lets you withstand the sweltering heat of the island zones or whatever. Whatever it is, that there's things that you're getting that are being used as tools to allow you to access an area, and you get those based on completing certain activities rather than, oh yeah, you want to go to this zone, you got to be level 10. Oh, you want to go fight this boss, you've got to fight the boss before and collect 50 scales to make the cloak, or whatever it was.
Yeah, and I think my perspective is, I don't think my perspective is the opposite of Phantom's.
Are you sure? Because you kind of told me I didn't explain myself very well.
Yeah, you didn't. It sucked, actually.
I will say there was
the
ambiguity in the conversation. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's why clarification is a little bit of what we're going to do here, I think.
Yeah, because what you started with was that you want to play an MMORPG that has no numbers and no levels. And then it went all over the place from there. And I don't know, as you were trying to explain, it just went all over the map. But some of it is that numbers and levels, using numbers to represent levels of progression, and there's going to be levels of progression in the RPG, is the easiest way to present that information, that progression information. And RPGs that are coming from D&D, are based on the hero's journey. So starting low and building up. They want to present something where you start where you're at a low level and fighting goblins, and then you're going to ramp up to fighting dragons, and you need to know where am I at a place where I can take care of a goblin, or am I at a place where I can take care of a dragon, and how do I know where that is? But then as we were talking, I think part of what you were saying, sometimes what you were saying made me think of, as I told you on Twitter, like, I want to surf without water. And I don't know how you surf without water. You could have skateboarding, which is kind of similar on land, but it's no longer surfing. It's skateboarding. So once you remove numbers and levels from a RPG, it's a different type of game, which could be a meow, which is why I think we should move the topic from Ashes of Creation, which is a MMORPG, and see what we can do, get closer to what you're asking for in a game that's not quite an RPG. It's a multiplayer evolving online world. So I'm wondering if you can present some of what you were hoping for, the type of gameplay you were hoping for, and then Snipehunter can let us know if Chronicles of Elyria might be closer to what you're asking for.
So I guess there were several layers to that.
Yeah.
What initially I think sparked it, modern MMORPGs sort of, versus previous ones like EverQuest, where it actually took time, right? Level meant something. It took years sometimes to get somewhere. And now they're just sort of a marker. They don't really, you're done within 2 weeks, right? So what's the point? That's sort of where that thought first came from. Why not present a story? And as you progress through that story, you gain more knowledge, you gain more power, you gain more whatever, equipment. Instead of, hey, you hit level 15, here's something new. So that's sort of where that started. That sort of also progressed then into, okay, well, how else could you represent, right, improvement as a character? So I think the example we used was smelting, which I got reamed somewhere about. I didn't know anything about metallurgy, but anyways, the idea of it, instead of smelting, the typical crafting sort of progression, you have to smelt 50 bars to get from silver to true silver or something like that. You have to numerically do a certain number of combines to get somewhere, and that's sort of represented as experience points. So why not present that again just in a different way? That's not necessarily a number. You complete a task for an NPC or something like that, and through that process, instead of I just sat here by a forge and did this 50 times, I actually completed a story or some sort of event. And through that, towards the end, I then learned a new skill. So sort of just how to present that change or that improvement of your character in a different way, in a way that's not numerical.
Yeah, but that's still going to have numbers, because it's still going to be
in the background,
a number of tasks. It's not going to be just one task and then you're the next level. So
but it's still presented differently. That's what I was getting at. It feels like it would be presented in a way that's more, you're more immersed in sort of what's going on. It's not just clicking a button.
Right. You mean like in the world, diegetically?
Yeah. Like,
that's different than numbers.
Because I think the other thing we talked about, and this really was, again, I got totally, I think it was Reddit. Somebody just anyways, led into me. That the idea of again, character progression. So, again, as a traditional thing, like EverQuest, you go out and kill 100 skeletons. You just happen to get enough experience points, and all of a sudden you go meet a trainer, and they give you 10 new spells to use. Like, is there a different way to present that sort of progression that is a little bit more meaningful in how you get there? Like, why did I just now learn a new shield barrier when all I did was use a damage spell to kill skeletons, right?
Right.
So that was sort of that's how that sort of that just sort of tangentially kind of went down the road with that. But it's all of that. That's sort of where it started and where it ended.
Yeah, and another reason why I thought Snipehunter would be a good person to discuss this with us is because of the history of D&D when it comes to how we reward things. Because when D&D first started, we just got experience from turning in treasure.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then later we started getting experience for killing stuff as well. And so now we have experience points as a kind of currency. So it used to be we would get treasure and we would turn that into experience that we could then use for gaining new spells or new skills or whatever. And then that changed into experience points. And now in MMORPGs, experience points are also a kind of currency that's different from gold that we can use to purchase our tools, which are the spells or abilities or whatever. And that could be presented differently, but that also is different than just saying no numbers and no levels. It's a side conversation.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, man. But I was just going to say, you have to track progression somehow, right? Like, characters need to advance, they need to grow, they need to change over time, and that should generally, we as players feel come as the results of effort put in, of accomplishment, for lack of a better way to put it. So yeah, I kind of agree with Diggs in that the numbers never really go away, but at the same time, I think Phantom X has the right of it. I think how you present those numbers makes all the difference in the world.
Right. And I gotta say, point and click adventures. I'm just gonna say that real quick and kind of do a little roundtable on that after I say my little piece. But you play a point and click adventure, your wimpy little character isn't fighting the dragon. They're solving a complex puzzle where they put a rock somewhere and they do a bunch of things, and this like Rube Goldberg style shtick occurs where you just barely by the skin of your teeth escape, and the dragon manages to conk themselves out on the rock that you place, so you get to go by and win. So that your character didn't get more powerful over the course of the game. Hell no. If anything, they probably got beat up and embarrassed many times because the game's filled with shtick. But, as they got the items and used them, they were able to keep going in different areas. They're able to complete social tasks where they're able to, appease somebody or make friends with somebody, or otherwise solve some sort of small puzzle and get the reward that leads to the next step. So if you want to look at, because it's a finite sort of experience, a point-and-click adventure, the end game is literally the game over screen, and all of the tasks leading up to that end game screen are basically your equivalent of your level progression and completing tasks and getting stronger or whatever, and then expending that strength where you need to. I kind of like that as just kind of a single player base point to look at in terms of like your character's really not getting any stronger. You're just getting the tools you need to solve the puzzles and continue. So whoever wants to speak next, that's go for it.
I want to hear Snipe talk about progression and what progression in a meow because I think that's part of the point is we are kind of moving away from what's presented in an MMORPG. And
I'm interested too, because not to interrupt you, but well, yeah, I am interrupting you, but because the point by you and what some other people have said too. That's what players are used to, right? So there has to be some way to show that you're progressing. I mean, I've talked before about flow in video games, and part of that is feedback and recognition that you are advancing. So yeah, I mean, I understand that there's a part that how would you make players feel like they progress? So yeah. Anyways, I didn't. To you, Snipe.
Yeah. So I, not gonna lie, this is basically what COE is like legitimately about, right? Everywhere that we possibly can, we try to. I want to say hide the numbers from you, but I feel like that's maybe doing a disservice to the effort that we take. Let's call it transmuting the numbers into experience. A really good example of that is the way progression in crafting works. In most games, crafting is literally just a number. My smithing is 57 or whatever. And to some extent, we have that in COE too. You do have an idea of how skilled you are in smithing that you could look up and express as like a bar or a number or something if we wanted to. But what we do instead is we take those numbers in the background and we do things like allow them to gate how quickly you can learn the various techniques of the craft, or the complexity of the recipes that you can understand, or the particular component sub-recipes that you can find. They're all still like a traditional sort of RPG, still gated by things that you might associate with like level or something like that. But when we present them to the player, the important thing to us is that we take all of that away so that what the player sees is what it would feel like to advance as that craft. So the blacksmith gets good enough that they can now, learn how to use a fullering jig to put a fuller into a blade, making their blades lighter, which suddenly allows them to, impart new properties onto their weapons that they make and make those weapons more valuable, and perform better in combat. All the time without any like numbers being presented to the player. Even the lightened property that goes onto a blade doesn't say like speed +3 or something like that. We don't do that, right? Fullering just lightens the blade. So it just applies the light tag to it. All of that helps to make you feel more accomplished as you move on, right? As you progress in the skill, you actually unlock more capability and you can feel it in the things that you're doing in the game. Like, you'll learn not just I know a new recipe, but I learned this recipe because I was taught this technique that I can only now understand. And this technique is literally a mechanic that you experience in the game firsthand. I don't know if the audience has seen it, but we did a design journal a while back about crafting where we talked about smithing. And there's some example video there where you can literally see that it's like a first person smithing sort of simulator, for lack of a better way to put it. And that was important to us, but I'm not going to lie, everything behind the scenes that runs all that stuff is still traditional RPG numbers and formulas and math, because that's what computers do,
So I guess my question in that example would be, how do you express to the player that they are improving, or the rate at which they're improving? Even just going from whatever would be first level to second level, or I don't know what the first few things are, but I would imagine you've got to make 5 items or 10 items or something. There's still some amount of task that you have to do in order to improve. And if I'm working at that, I'm going to want to know, okay, this is going to take me like 5 items, or this is going to take me 3 hours, or this is going to take me 20 minutes, whatever that gauge is. I'm going to be using some form of numbers to try and figure out how long I have to do this task before I progress.
Yeah, we don't, like I said, we don't actually like show you the numbers or anything, but we do provide you feedback in the form of both diegetic stuff, like the literal quality of the weapons that you produce is visible on the things that you produce. I don't know why I keep using weapons, I guess just because it's the go-to.
No, that's fine. We started there, so you should stay there. That's fine.
But yeah, like for example, if you're really bad at it, at first there'll be hammer marks all over the blade as a sort of like texture and normal map combination applied to the asset. But as you get better, fewer and fewer of them show up until eventually you understand how to actually make a clean and precise and perfectly planed blade. And this all sort of happens in the world. Now, mind you, when you're doing the crafting, there is some HUD elements. So like when you do things particularly well, you might get sound feedback, or you might see, the addition of a particular particle effect or something when your hammer strikes the metal. But again, they're all very subtle and low key. Where we actually like hint you as to where to go next and what to do next is the whole mechanic we have of knowledge. So one of the things that we realized is that often levels are used artificially to indicate what your character knows, not what they're actually capable of. So you might, if you were to divide those two, think of skill more like the training that you've received, and knowledge more like the sort of like meta behind all of that, the education that you've received in addition to the physical training. So in COE, if you want to learn something, you either have to literally follow along in a book, in which case you'll realize that you're making progress as you literally begin to be able to use the recipes in the book and actually see them produce, viable results, or you have to be physically taught by someone. And someone's ability to physically teach you depends both on their skill and your skill, and their knowledge for that matter. But that's just because of the way we divide knowledge and skills. So if you want to learn a technique from a master smith, you may not literally be able to learn that yet. And when you attempt to learn it, you'll get indications in the learning experience that show you you're just not ready for that yet. In which case, the same smith, who is clearly already more skilled than you, obviously would have access to the skills that he could teach you or techniques. I shouldn't use the word skills, sorry. Teach you those techniques to get you up to the point where he can teach you the technique that you want to. And so the people who you go to for help sort of diegetically become your skill tree or your skill bar or something like that.
Right. And so there's a few things there that I understand. So I think I understand. So one is the place that you're getting to that I think is different than what Phantom X was explaining last time, is that one of the things he wants to get away from is experience used as currency to buy something, right? So I think he's saying, I don't want to have to kill 5 goblins if I'm going to be a cleric and I'm supposed to heal stuff instead of kill stuff. Why do I use these XP points from killing stuff to learn the healing skill when I wasn't doing any healing? And that's a form of XP being used as currency. Part of what you're saying is that, and I think this is what he's asking for actually, instead of numbers and levels, what he's asking for is techniques. And there's still going to be a number of there's going to be a number of techniques that you need to have before you can do whatever. Some of that you can follow along in a book is what I'm understanding. So
correct.
Instead of seeing a gauge or a actual numbers, you're counting up how many techniques to you and how quickly it got you, how quickly you're progressing through the book. But it's still going to kind of have some degree of levels and numbers in there.
Right. In a way, you can think of the book as the like skill tree or level progression scheme for that talent.
Right. And then I think there is something else with regard to the master teaching you. How does that? So when the master is teaching you, how do you present that progression there? Like, again, how would I know how long I need to study? Because
right.
When I play, I normally try to carve out an amount of time in my game session. So I know, okay, if I have an hour, so I'm going to spend an hour. I want to get this far. I want to get 1 bub of experience before I stop playing tonight, is often one of my goals.
Right.
So
I'm going to go
when
for
you're
a
doing
ding.
that,
I totally.
Yeah, so or a partial ding. I just need to know how much time it is or something. I have a gauge for that. So what would that be like with studying with a master? How would I be gauging my progression for that game session?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different. Instead of like going for, the partial ding or something similar, you're going to have to like set a milestone for yourself. So, for example, you might want to become a smith because you want to make a sword, right? So you might go to a smith and then say, teach me how to make a sword. The smith will say, well, okay, do you know how to make an ingot? Right? And if your answer is no, then he'll be like, well, why don't we start there? Right? And he'll walk you through the recipe of building a sword from from raw materials to the components to the assembly of the weapon to finishing the blade. But he'll do that from his own personal experience. It's not like there's a wiki where he can go up and he can be like, well, you can see here that if you just make 17 ingots, then you're going to obviously be able to make a sword blank. And then once you have a sword blank, then you just need to go over and cut 237 strips of leather, which will teach you how to make a leather wrap. It's not like that. It's way more, I don't want to use the word capricious, but from a player perspective, it will maybe feel like that because it's not a practice makes perfect model. It's more like an experiment and learn through failure kind of model. So the more you do a thing, the less you actually get back from it. You want to learn new skills. You need to like step out of your safety area. You have to step out of your comfort zone and sort of push your envelope. So you're better off, for example, learning how to make the ingot and then turning the ingot into a dagger blank or a sword blank or some other sort of simple something you can just pound with a hammer and make, even if it's really bad, than to just make ingot after ingot after ingot after ingot, because the eureka moments that allow you to learn the next thing come from attempting to do it. Eventually, you get to the point where you can just do it and you don't need to like worry about all the things that can happen along the way. So, sorry, I should step back a second. I forgot. One of the things that we do that I maybe haven't stressed much is we change the experience of smithing or any of the other crafts for that matter based on your skill in that craft. So the first time you try to make an ingot, you're going to screw it up, and you're going to screw it up because you like drop the hammer, or you can't keep the ingot in the tongs, or you can't read the colors very well as you're trying to heat up the metal. And that's just a reflection of your literal skill. Like that's the closest you're going to get to a number on your skill is, can I even tell how hot that metal is? Right. Those start to go away the better you get at using those techniques and the easier the thing you're trying to make. So that eventually banging out ingots because you just know how to do it is going to be so trivial that there's literally nothing you can glean from it, nothing new that you can learn. But at the same time, if you want to mass produce them, you're great at it now. And you can just literally, because we're talking about smithing, bang them out, right? But if you want to push yourself, you need to try new things. And that means seeking out new recipes, either from a smith or from a codex. And that means learning new techniques, or at least trying to learn new techniques, because it's not going to be easy at first. And we have a system in place where you can't even attempt a technique unless somebody is there to instruct you how to use it, or you have a manual that sort of describes that process. And while you have that manual, you can try it, and you're probably going to be pretty bad at it, but you'll get better slowly through some practice until eventually you won't actually even need the manual to perform that technique anymore. It'll just be something that you can do naturally in the interface for smithing. That's the point where you've actually learned that technique.
So what's the feedback that I'm getting that makes me think that it's worthwhile? So some of the feedback I'm getting is that as I'm making the ingot, so I start with one ingot, right? And it takes, I don't know, how long would you say it might take me to make an ingot?
That would depend. The longest
amount of time it would take me to make an ingot.
But generally, probably just a few minutes, maybe 7.
Right. Okay. So I could make, say, 5 ingots in 20 minutes, maybe.
Right.
And as I'm going through those 5, I'll notice a difference in quality, and hopefully the quality will somewhat improve as I go along.
Visibly so, in fact. Yeah.
Yeah. And so as I'm doing my thing, the feedback that I'm getting that I'm making some progress is some kind of quality indication. And then I'll be able to take the best quality and do something else with that ingot, try to do something with it.
Right. Now, to be clear, there's nothing to stop you from trying the second you produce an ingot. It's just you're probably going to fail until you
right.
enough to, you know.
I'm just saying if I move on to the other thing, I'm probably gonna, and I'm hoping to have a quality next thing. I might want to start with a quality.
Thanks. My question.
That's a fair cut.
Yeah. That's actually something I was kind of wondering about is as a measure intentionally or otherwise that kind of counters best practices. It kind of seems like the amount of variance from the entirety of the process, from the quality of the smelter and the skill of the smelter to the quality of the tools that you use and the person that makes the ingot to the person that actually shapes it and works it out to go into the tempering process at the very end, that all of the quality of everything, the level of skill of everybody, the quality of material and its variance across the board makes it that you can never really have two of the exact same thing because there's so much minutia in all of the variants that there's literally no way to like plug in a recipe and end up with like the perfect king sword of haste or whatever. Thrown back to a different conversation of ours.
Right. But no, that's exactly correct. And that's in fact kind of the intent. So when we set out to build these systems, we didn't just think about ways that we could like hide the numbers. What we really wanted to do was bring out the feel of performing these actions. So we also realized that to do that, we would need to make them broad enough, or I guess actually I mean deep enough. I shouldn't. Maybe broad's the wrong way to put it, but we had to make them capable of supporting your entire play career. If that's all that you wanted to be was a smith, we had to be able to make sure that that would provide you years of experience, and a finite set fixed output would just literally make that impossible. Right? That's a known quantity problem. Eventually you hit the end of the road and there's just nothing else that you can do. So the very first thing we set out to do was to build a system that would allow both like personal signature, personal style, and a literal infinite number of possible combinations so that we never put you in the position of having done everything and then deciding it's time to go home. And, as we've been talking, I realize reading the chat here that Caspian raises actually a really good point in that only about at this point, let's say 40% of the skills in the game are really like pure character skill. Everything else is either at least partially or almost entirely dependent on player skill. Player skill is probably also like somewhere between like 35 and 40%. And then there's a middle ground where there's like a Venn diagram overlap between character skill and player skill. And that was important to us too, because we realized there were a lot of experiences that were like bound by numbers in traditional games that didn't need to be anymore, that we had the technology to make those mechanics, those experiences work. Archery is a really good example of that. There is very little character skill in archery. There's some like techniques and stuff that you can learn. I mean, I'm not saying that there's none, but most of the experience of excelling in archery is about your actual ability to aim and track your targets and actually know when to let the bow fly, know how to angle your bow up for ballistic shots. And that's almost entirely on you. We might do something like damp down how much like jitter there is if you hold the bowstring for a particular period of time with something like a character skill, but that would be about it.
Gotcha.
I would say that the description you gave, at least of the, basically is what I used when we were talking about this. So I'm really happy to hear it, because it was the idea of going to someone instead of banging out 50 bars of something. You actually go to someone, they teach you, okay, what do you know? This is what we're going to teach you through the process. I realize, again, there's numbers behind all this. I mean, it's computers, right? But some being presented in a way that just feels like you're actually learning something new. And then, I mean, what you just described basically is maybe I didn't word it very well last show, Diggs, but that's sort of what I was getting at with the idea of, okay, I'm going to go meet someone in the hills that's going to, okay, tell me what you know. Okay, you don't know this, so I'm going to work you through the process of learning this. That is essentially what I was trying to get at. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, we also realized early on that you can use this exact sort of system of presenting this information and sort of focusing everything more on the experience of performing it than the numbers on the sheet. So you can also do things like confound wiki searches because now there's an infinite number of items in our crafting system, for example. There really isn't going to be a best. It's going to be more like meta in an MMO, or in like a League of Legends or something like that, or an Overwatch. And it's going to change over time as people discover new technologies and new resources and new skills and new techniques, because the techniques are not symmetrically distributed across the world. They exist where the people would know them, which means you'll have to go and seek them out to actually learn them. And with them will come associated recipes and things that you're going to have to pick up out in the world, or at least have brought to you by somebody who did. The older the world gets, just like in real life, the easier it gets to disseminate information. But at least at first, it's kind of going to be on you. And, where a lot of games have done everything they can to sort of capture the sort of wandering hero trope, we more kind of want to present the trade world sort of approach, the I'm a journeyman, not just because my skill level has reached journeyman level, but because it's time for me to go out into the world and learn something new that I can't find at home. And I think that's actually really important to sort of sealing the deal on this kind of experience.
So, yeah, a couple of things there. One, I was going to say, I'm still not convinced that doing it this way is going to be fun. That's one of my concerns about Chronicles of Elyria, or at least not fun for me. Because it might seem like too much work than I want in a game. But one of the things that you just mentioned for the Ashes of Creation Battle Royale, I would not be running into PvP normally, but because there is a storm pushing me to the center, instead of hiding the whole time, I do have to leave my comfort zone and move out, and it does push me to do stuff that I would not normally do, which is nice. So like you say, that's kind of could be good to say, hey, don't just stay where you are. If you want a different experience, or a significantly different experience, it's time for you to
go
move
find
away.
it.
Although I wonder if you're in a big enough city, there still should be quite a bit of time that you could be going to different teachers and getting
Absolutely.
horizontal progression instead of vertical.
For that matter, if you grow up in a trade hub, if your character comes of age in some place that has a port, or that happens to be where all the trade caravans move through, you could have exposure to the world's techniques via the codices, the books, the recipe collections, and you may actually never leave your home. But that's really just a different way to play that same sort of craftsman, really.
Well,
yeah.
Okay, so here's another question then. I guess, is there much of a skill requisite for experimentation and invention? Like, if I'm, let's say I'm a blacksmith who makes weapons, but I see that a particular design done in architecture, or the way a specific type of tool is designed, would make for a perfect shape for a flanged mace. Is that the sort of thing that will exist, where getting into different sort of crafting intersections will broaden your horizons and open up opportunities to make variations of items that otherwise didn't exist in the world?
So yeah, that's a really interesting problem to solve. Without underselling Chronicles of Elyria, because I think we're way closer to solving this problem than any other game design that I've read, I would argue that we're not exactly solving the problem so much as trying to find another way to give you a similar experience. Because in reality, that's a huge content problem. It's really hard to give players all of the tools that would be necessary to make that happen. We'd effectively have to figure out a way to bundle a 3D modeler into the system, or build a literal deformation model into everything that you build, so that when you're hammering your steel, you're not just hammering it towards a form or away from a form based on how badly or how well or how poorly you did it, but literally just like letting physics simulate the strike of a hammer against hot metal. And as much as you might be able to pull that off with enough horsepower, the reality is the cost of trying to pull that off would be basically impossible. And so we want that experience, but we realize that we can't like bring you that exactly. And this is sort of where, the thing I like to say, verisimilitude over veracity comes in. What we do instead, we have a recipe-based system. So if you want to make a mace, you start with a recipe for a mace. However, we let you use any compatible component at any step of the recipe. So, if a recipe calls for steel, any sufficiently hardenable metal will work in its place. If a recipe calls for a flanged mace head, any mace head that you could mount in that position would work. We also have a system called adornments, where you can place things onto the things that you build that sort of can break up its silhouette and its style and the way that it looks. And then we also have a system that allows you to research new technologies in the game that aren't available yet. And one of the things you do through this system is signal to us developers the types of things that you want to see happen in the world. And we can then use those as we work in the background and we implement new mechanics or new items or new recipes that we can just insert into the world as you discovering how to, take that architectural arch and incorporate it into armor design or something like that. And when you do, you'll get a new recipe that works in our recipe system. So it'll never be freeform, but you will absolutely be able to experience the idea of, could I apply that to this totally off-brand thing? It's just we have to do it a different way just because of the realities of production and the technology levels we have at our disposal.
So is it something where everybody who's contributing towards a certain type of research or people who are progressing towards a certain type of research, it'll get flagged and developers will be notified, hey, people are working towards this? Or is it the sort of thing where like you commit, you and potentially multiple people can commit to a research project and it actually has like an abstract or something that has to be written out like in establishing like this is what we're setting out to do or whatever that the developers actually look at?
Yeah, it's actually a little bit of both. The system is not in the alpha yet, so there's a bunch of things I just flat out can't yet talk about. But the idea is that we can both capture that you're pushing towards a particular like branch of technology, so that we can give you eureka moments and sort of just unlock technology as we go, and giving you the ability to literally call out me and my friends or me and my research guild or me and my university are attempting this thing with this particular goal. And then that becomes something that gets floated up to us developers. You may never actually get there. If you're like, we're trying to get warp gate travel to other planets, it may be that you just never manage to make the breakthrough that leads to that. But that doesn't mean you won't unlock a lot of stuff along the way, because there's no reason why you wouldn't. You would still make discoveries in that attempt. And we want that to be the feeling that you get when you play the game.
So Diggs, I have a question. You a lot of your focus is sort of how do I know I'm progressing? So I guess my question to you would be, how do you know now, like when you're playing, like again, when you're exploring, how do you know are you basing that character improvement, player improvement? Like how do you now know that you're progressing?
Everything in an RPG is focused on character improvement, because I'm playing a character, and I'm building a character to be better at stuff than I would be as a player. So in an RPG, I should be able to use my character skills to figure out, investigation. I shouldn't have to be good at investigation as a player. I should build my character to have intelligence or wisdom, and then build up those skill points so that I use my character to do what I want. In an MMORPG, I'm watching the experience bar, or when I'm exploring, I am uncovering the fog of war. So I can actively see progression, and it's either going to be percentage of the map is being uncovered, and I'm going to think of that in terms of percentage, or experiences ramping up, and that's going to be, again, some form of bar or gauge that I'm looking at. And I usually have a goal of, if the experience bar is divided into 10 bulbs, I want to get at least one bulb filled, or two, or three, or a couple of levels. And then I'm also trying to gain enough experience, or enough skill points to get a specific signature ability for my class. So if I'm playing a druid in EverQuest, I want Spirit of the Wind, right? Yeah, I want Spirit of the Wind, and I don't feel like I'm a druid until I get Spirit of the Wind, and then I'm good.
So I guess my question just would be, do you think that's as good as it gets, or could there be a better way to go about that?
Well,
because a lot of the response I got was, well, this is the simplest way and the easiest way. It's what we're used to. That's what it will be.
Numbers and levels are the easiest, simplest way to convey that information to the player, which is why we have it, because we're used to that. Again, even when you said advanced smelter, advanced is a level. If we're thinking apprentice, journeyman, master, those are levels.
Yeah, those ranks are levels too. Absolutely.
Yeah. And because we're trained, you kept saying we're trained to think that way. And I'm saying, because we're trained to think that way, that's why it's presented to us in that way.
Okay.
Presented to us because it's easy, because we spend our whole lives being trained.
Right. And it definitely simplifies the math that a game designer has to work with too.
Yeah.
Actually, though, I will say one of the benefits of the way that we're doing things diegetically in the world is that a lot of the goals that you were just talking about still exist in our play loops, even though we're decathecting the numbers from the experience. So a really good example is combat. Combat is really largely player driven. There are attack moves that you learn, which we also call techniques, so that it kind of mirrors crafting. They're not the same thing, though. But we have combat moves that you learn in these martial art styles. So, for example, if you were, the traditional paladin character, and you wanted to learn, how to wield a warhammer and take out, 100 foes, you're going to have to find somebody in the world who has knowledge of that martial art style who can teach it to you. And so you still have that milestone of, well, I'm not really this until I've gained, I'm not really X until I've gained Y ability. We still have that, right? The difference is just how you go out about gaining Y ability. And likewise, we have that with almost every other sort of skill in the game. There's complexity of locks and lock picking, and what sort of tools that you learn how to use while learning how to pick locks determines what kind of complexity of locks that you can unlock, right? All of that's still there, and we allow players to sort of decide for themselves what those goals are. Even uncovering a map, in our case, you're going to have to actually draw it yourself, but even uncovering a map is kind of a thing that is still something that you do as an explorer.
Right, but I guess I'm saying, right, if I'm going to, I like exploring, but I don't think I want to have to learn how to draw a map, or I don't want to have a player skill that makes me good at drawing a map. I don't think.
Yeah, drawing a map isn't necessarily about your ability to freehand draw the map, but there is an experience for drawing a map in the game.
And I don't know, right? And I like gaining points that say, hey, now I'm good at picking a lock. I don't know that I want to actually go through the mundane experience. I want to be heroic. I don't necessarily want to go through the mundane actions of literally learning different kinds of locks to unpick. And it's right, because so when I play when I play RPGs, I want to experience it like a novel. And, that's not part of the novel usually is, the minutia of the lock picking, learning the lock picking experience.
It probably depends on the novel.
I mean, I can't think of any novel that I've read in the last.
Okay, well,
40
usually
years.
it's the Deus Ex Machina that, oh yeah, it just happens to be the type of lock that you know how to pick or break or breach.
Well, they speed through it. So there are some. This does not happen in fantasy novels or most fantasy novels. There's a history novel like Water for Chocolate, I think is. That movie where they literally went through and you actually are making the different kinds of chocolate and you're learning, right? There are some books I'm aware of, not so much in fantasy straight, but I'm just saying, usually they skip over the learning parts, right?
Right. No, it's like Neuro says, unless it's important for the plot, you probably skip right over that.
Yeah. So, I'm just saying, I don't know. Maybe I will. It depends on how it's presented, but I'm just saying I wonder about that in terms of the fun.
It's also probably worth noting that the time it takes to learn that process on Earth is substantially longer than the time it takes to learn the similar process in the.
Yeah.
And see, I guess going back to, again, this idea of different locks or different levels, apprentice that you mentioned. I think my answer to that, when you brought that up, well, you have to go through different, levels to be a doctor, right? You have to do college, and you have to do medical school, and this and that. But my point to that was that yes, that is sort of, I guess, a level. But as you're comparing to real world, as you're learning, you don't become a doctor because you treated 100 patients, right? You become a doctor because somebody taught you how to do that. And through that process, yes, you are treating people or you're doing something, but it's not about the number. It's about the process of getting there.
But there's not a lack of number. Numbers are involved there. Like you have to treat. It's not like you treat one person and then you get it.
Because
you have to treat a bunch of people,
because that's a part of the process of learning, and that's
sure.
But you don't. But it sort of removes. Instead of I'm counting every person I've healed, right? It's sort of a natural part of the learning experience by meeting someone and them teaching you. Like you're not necessarily tracking. Okay, this is number 10. This is number 11. It's more working through the steps of what you're being taught, and through that process, yes, you see 50 people, and at the end, you're trained. But removing the counting.
What I'm saying is, but you're taking tests, you're taking classes. You have to complete a certain number of tests. You have to complete a certain number of classes. There's numbers and levels involved in that.
But that just, again, I'm actually, after hearing you talk, Snipe, I'm really excited about this process because that's what.
Yeah, but I think what you were asking wasn't, I want to play without numbers or levels, which is what you said. What you meant was you want an organic experience so that what you're doing,
I want progression,
or how you're progressing reflects what you're actually doing.
This is not me saying there's no progression. It's how it's being presented to me.
Right, but still, when I would ask you how, I'm trying to get an idea of that, and you just weren't very good about it.
He said just what I said, but anyways, we're starting to get towards the end of time. Something that had come up that was also interesting, and I think I probably know everyone's answer. It was not at all what we were talking about, but there was this character levels interfere with my ability to play with friends. I'm curious how you feel about that and how that a meow would be different in that regard. Any of you? It was an interesting point.
Yeah,
it wasn't where I was going.
That's a really tough problem, actually, because a lot of the it's hard to imagine an MMO that doesn't have progression in it lasting very long, because eventually you just sort of run out of things you want to do. At the same time, the idea of progression is sort of antithetical to just being able to play with your friends whenever you want. The more you go all in on progression, the more your ability to just play with anyone suffers, basically. And that's a serious problem. Like we thought about it a lot. I'll even say not just on Chronicles of Elyria, but on lots of other online games that I've been a part of. And there's been tons of different potential solutions to this problem. Sidekicking, reverse sidekicking, about a million different variations of those two things. but yeah, we feel like in real life, if I go out, hunting with an expert hunter, I don't lose my ability to learn something from the fact that that expert hunter is there. But on the other hand, if they're better than me, they can pull my ass out of the fire and things like that. And so we feel like that experience can carry over into an online world. And so since we don't have, experience, since we don't really have an overall character level, even if we do track, knowledge and skills and things like that, we figure that there isn't any barrier to the way that you guys play together. You're not gonna steal each other's progress away from each other. In a worst case scenario, you might end up in a situation where, let's say you're 4 guys and 3 of you are not very good, but one of you is really, really good. Well, maybe that guy is going to carry you for a little bit when he needs to, but you're going to learn the whole way because of the various mechanics that we have involved. We have a mechanic called bolstering, where it's kind of like a stronger together mechanic, so that you and your friends, when you play, if you have the ability to bolster each other, will actually get like a little bit of I guess a buff, for a better word, while you're together. That may even make things more survivable for the lower skilled players. But really, it's going to be the sort of experience of, I'm not particularly good at fighting this guy, but with this guy by my side, I'm going to live through this. And as a result, I'm going to learn a lot about what it takes to fight one of these things. And I'm going to take that knowledge back with me when we're no longer working together. And so we sort of go all in on that idea of, you want to seek out people who are skilled and who are knowledgeable and who know more than you, because they can help you become better, rather than sort of discourage, I don't want to go hang out with that guy. He's level 80. I'm just not going to get anything out of it. It's dumb. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And it really, the opposite, where somebody who's low level can get a benefit from being somebody who's super high level. It never really made sense to me. I know that there's the, using the mechanic of trying to keep people from power grinding and power leveling, leveling up their buddies and stuff. Sure. But for something where it isn't nearly as direct, and there's a lot more things that one can be learning than just like, oh yeah, you're getting either combat skill or you're getting crafting skill, and those are the only things you're ever going to get. The idea that each different element of things, not just the actual skill that you're trying to learn, but your attributes and their improvement along the way, your ability to work with people, and I'm guessing that there's skills for being a good teacher and being a good learner, and that the more you advance in either one, the better you can do. So it would make sense, like, the more you spend time learning from people, or the more time you spend teaching people, the better you're going to get at it. So regardless, there's always going to be a synergistic advantage.
Yeah, that's definitely what we're shooting for.
Yeah, I don't know why, aside from, again, the power level and the grinding aspect, I don't know why that wasn't something that's really been done this whole time, other than, you're right, like, sidekicking is kind of like a way to approach or something. But I think of, like, Ultima Online, for example, it didn't really take a lot of skill to smelt most of the things. If you roll a new character that has 50 in smelting and 50 in mining and, decent attributes or whatever, you can get along, you can get by, you can actually do fairly well for yourself pretty quickly.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you need to get a little combat skill, you can either macro on the training dummies, or legitimately sit there and click it. Obviously, that's not going to teach you how to, in the context of COE, it's not going to teach you how to do all of your various different techniques. But then we also talk about the idea of observation, that if somebody is working on a Wing Chun doll, and they're going through all their different patterns and stuff, and you're watching and you're kind of doing it in the air, and maybe even ask them about it and have them show you just a little bit, that suddenly, as just an observer and not somebody that's actually, doing the activity, you're starting to potentiate your ability to learn it and do it for yourself later down the road. To me, that's great. Like the idea that you can actually give a lecture to like 20 or 30 people and that they're actually learning from it, that you're actually getting the benefit from teaching all of them. That doesn't exist in most games. That's a really, really, really interesting sort of thing. And I think that's the sort of thing we've really been hoping for something like a Meow, to like really push things beyond the stale MMO paradigm that we've seen from like Meridian 59 through WoW and everything in between and thereafter. That you don't really have an analog for anything like that. You don't have a basis for that level of social interaction. And even more so, the fact that you can park your character with an OPC script to be a professor at an established university of sorts, where they're just sitting there, giving lectures and teaching students and stuff, and you aren't even playing that character anymore. That's awesome. Like to me, that's really super exciting. It's the stuff that I've been waiting for.
Keeps the knowledge in the world, right? Like, so it doesn't just get lost. But yeah, I actually think it's kind of funny that you mentioned that it's not really a tableau that you experience in MMOs. I think it's kind of amusing that it is, though, a tableau that you like see set up in MMO settings. There's always in some city somewhere a classroom or something where, or like a dojo where a master is demonstrating technique in front of 30 people. But damn well as you're playing that game that there's no way you're ever going to learn what that guy's doing, no matter how long you stood there and listened to his lecture. In fact, it was so tropey that in like EQ2 in the Knoll expansion, I can't remember, in the Split Paw expansion, they put that storyteller in. And if you sit there and listen to the storyteller, you end up getting an instance quest, right? I was so shocked that actually did something that I literally spent a week telling all my friends they got to go play this game because it did this thing.
That's awesome.
Well, there's a super interesting conversation about grinding right now in chat too. Now I know we're towards the end here, but I guess superficially, I like reading this. That is another good example of why it just to me is how can you present things in a different way, right? Because there has to be some sort of progress. But so instead of feeling like you're grinding, I would rather it be I met this old man somewhere, I did some things, and all of a sudden, wow, I realize I've learned something. Like instead of the old kill 10 rats scenario. But Diggs is so enveloped in chat right now. I think we've
I have another thing I need to say, but keep going. I'm listening.
Oh no, you go right ahead. Are you done?
No,
are you done?
You're talking. Finish.
Are you done arguing with the people in chat? No?
I'm not arguing. I'm complaining. I just said I agree.
That is what I would envision. Is just again the whole point of this is sort of how can I, instead of feeling I'm trying to reach that next level, how can I do that without realizing I'm doing that, right? So.
Yeah, how do you make that not feel like work?
Yeah,
is really the big problem that we have to solve.
That's what we're talking about here.
Because, and the example I always use is again sort of World of Warcraft. I mean, it's what are the point of the levels? Why are you doing? Why is that even in there anymore? It just feels like it's well, I have to do this, but why? How can it be presented to me in a different way that I can get to that next level without feeling like I had to kill?
Right, get back to wanting to do it. Not
having. And this is the other problem with the way it was being presented last time is that because we agree on a lot of the problems with the way MMORPGs have tried to tackle this issue and why we're all waiting for something different than the traditional MMORPG 1.0, which is what I call it. But one of the problems, and you're kind of touching on this in a way, is, again, if I'm a cleric or a druid, why do I have to kill stuff in order to advance as a cleric? And part of the reason for that is that there's not enough healing quests in the game. So I would love to focus primarily on healing quests instead of killing stuff as a cleric. I would love to get experience from giving people Spirit of the Wolf. But those options aren't there. So yeah, if we could have more activities that really address the role we're hoping to play. The cleric was supposed to be is the fantasy version of the medic in the war games. If I want to be the medic and not kill a bunch of stuff, but heal a bunch of stuff, I'd like to be able to do that. And that hasn't been presented very well in MMORPGs.
Totally agree.
So one of my questions for you, Snipe, was about in Chronicles of Elyria. I kind of mentioned being able to gauge your level of defeating a goblin versus defeating a dragon. One of the problems also with MMORPGs is that, D&D was, level 1 to 20, which seems reasonable. Level 1 to 50, and then now it's at 90 to 100. That's just crazy vertical.
Right. It's either that or it's just stretching out those same 20 levels across a much longer grind, right?
Yeah. So in Chronicles of Elyria, how would we gauge our ability to tackle a goblin versus a dragon? Meaning, how will we know that, this mob we should probably run away from or not?
Right. So we're trying really hard to make that obvious in the world. In the same way, well, and maybe obvious isn't the right word, possible maybe. In the same way that you would have to size up somebody to see if you wanted to fight them in real life. We want to make sure that what you see in the game when you're looking at someone sort of informs you as to things that you might use like /con in an old MMO for. So if they're strong, they'll be muscular. If they've got reach, they'll have literally long arms. If they're particularly skilled with a weapon, you'll see it in the way that they use that weapon the second they draw it. There are some places where that might be deliberately subverted. Animals that hunt by trapping, for example, we're not gonna give you a tell until maybe you've sprung their trap. But generally speaking, just like in real life, we want you to be able to size someone up, to be able to be like, I don't think I could take that guy, but have to make that decision yourself as an element of player skill.
I'm thinking of the problem of facing off against a guy who's like, I'm not going to draw my weapon until
Yep.
I need to see if I can take you. Well, you just have to.
You'll have to try
first and see if I can block you. Interesting. Okay. Let's see if we can get Snipe to answer this question from Whispering Monkey. Guys, I've got a fairly irrelevant question, but this is the best moment when I can ask. And it is, as I understand, there are NPC characters that can be later inhabited. So you can have a son, which would be a young NPC that would grow, and later you can either play him yourself or have someone else play it. Can these NPC characters be tutored somehow to mimic that if you're a rich merchant, you'd educate your offspring, and therefore it would have a higher starting stats than, say, a random orphan?
Short answer, yes. Long answer, it's a little complicated. When you have a child in Chronicles of Elyria, you do so by signing what's called a child contract. We use our contract system as a sort of way to tell the game, we want these two characters to produce offspring. And when you fill out this contract, you decide things like what culture you're going to raise them in, what level of education you're going to attempt to give them, and things like that. And when you do, that influences the child over their development up to the age where they can finally be inhabited by a player. So yeah, they can be sort of taught and tutored. And once they're actually in your household, you can even more directly do so, through the sort of typical mechanics that everybody else experiences in the game. There's an exception to that, though, and that's wards of the state. With wards of the state, when you enter the game as a ward of the state, you enter the game younger than you could as a regular family member NPC, which means at this point your education is kind of up to you. But as a way to compensate for that, wards of the state actually, during this period of adolescence, gain their skills more quickly than other characters would, so that you can sort of direct their education yourself that way. But when you're raising your own child, you decide things in the contract, and that influences them up until the point that they're actually like in your possession, so to speak, when they're till they're part of your family. And then at that point, whatever you do diegetically in the world will, influence their upbringing up until the point where they're inhabited by another player.
I think we are near the end. I don't know if there's anything else that anybody had to talk about, or
could talk about plenty for hours, but this
we do have Snipe here on camera, so
I'm actually late for a D&D game. It was a cool conversation, so I didn't want to leave.
Well, cool. Thank you for joining us. I mean, this has been a blast. So
absolutely
very interesting. It helps me think through the process of what I've been thinking about now for the last few weeks. So thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone for watching. So for those who just have never watched us before, we are on every Friday. We sort of alternate between COE and Ashes of Creation. And so come join us. We like to chat and ramble quite a bit. And you can fight with Diggs in chat all the time. So.
That wasn't a fight.
Okay.
No, that was actually a fun conversation too. I was doing everything I could not to jump in.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, seriously, thank you for joining us. And everyone have a good Friday night and a great weekend.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming, everybody.